Have you seen any effects of the FDA staffing reductions on submissions or more generally just interactions lately?
Well, from a submission standpoint, no. And the reason being is that the FDA has their DUFA goals to meet. And that's, they are required to meet those. So, 510K, like a traditional 510K has 90 days. So FDA has to get that done. Special 510K has 30 days. So they have to, they have to meet that deadline. And the thing is that affects their funding. And they also, the other thing about the funding is you pay for that review. So it's not coming out of the government budget or anything. That's we pay for that.
Yeah.
So as far as submission goes, no, not really. As far as outside interaction, such as maybe like 513Gs, which don't have, and believe it or not, they don't have a timeline goal or review timeline goal. And then small business applications. That's another thing, for submitting those. And client that had a 10-day meeting with the FDA on their submission. And the FDA, they wanted some additional information. We gave them additional information, and the FDA said, they were going to respond back, but they kind of left it, we had 4 questions, and the FDA reviewer said, look, we consider this closed now because of the reduction in force. And if you want anything else, then submit a submission information request. That is a pre-submission or a Q-sub, and there's a MDUFA goal for that. So, they're meeting their MDUFA goal because they have to, but anything else, I believe that they're kind of, maybe putting a hold on those type of reviews.
What's the feeling among industry teams right now that you've talked to recently?
I think it's just with everything, or anything that kind of gets us out of our comfort zone. Everybody's like, whoa, hold on. Everybody, to me, and it seems like the people that I've talked to and clients, they're kind of nervous. Like, hey, do you know what's going on with the FDA? I know that it's, FDA has got a job to do, and they're going to do their job. Like I mentioned before about the MDUFA goals, but I think everybody's just nervous and they don't know what's going to happen. And that, the uncertainty always makes people a little hesitant to do anything. Like I said, the FDA is going to do their job. And I don't think if you have a planned submission, and you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed and everything's all nice, free in a bow, I think you go ahead and submit. The only thing that I can think of, and this is applies to smaller companies, they're losing out on revenue. That's one thing that I've worked with a lot of small companies, and, that was their lifeblood, that one product that they have that they're waiting on a submission. And if they can't sell it, then they either got to go back to their investors or, go to banks and get money because they don't have any revenue. So that's one thing that they need to consider is the business risk.
There seems to be more urgency to get things right from day one with the submission package. Talk to me about the value of working with a consultant specifically now, given internal pressures at FDA that might bring extra scrutiny, maybe less tolerance for sloppy submissions, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there with sloppy submissions and sloppy. It's not any, disrespect to people that don't use consultants, but a consultant, our job is know the process, and we've been through the process multiple times, and we know what the FDA, I have a better understanding of what the FDA is going to be looking for, and we look at it with the submission, we look at it with a critical eye from an outsider standpoint, and can kind of predict what the questions are going to be, and kind of like, this doesn't make sense here. Let's explain a little bit more on your device description, give a little bit more detail, look at the test reports, make sure they're clear. Give a concise summary of the results. Look at your substantial equivalence argument. Is it solid?
Yeah.
And if there's any question whatsoever, submit a pre-sub. I was working with a client this morning, and they wanted to ask some questions in their submission, or, kind of prepare the FDA like, hey, we're going to do this in the future. And I'm like, no. You don't do that. You want to be able to focus on your device. If you have any questions, submit a pre-sub. It does take a little bit more time. It's a 60 to 75 day review for the FDA to look at your pre-submission. But again, you have the MDUFA goal, the deadline, right? The 60 to 75 days. And then you get FDA to look at that, and they'll give you some feedback. as to, yep, we agree with your performance testing, or no, you missed this whole section over here, and a consultant will help you with those gaps and bridge those gaps. But like I said, if there's any big questions on, your substantial equivalence argument, definitely reach out and get a pre-submission going.
You mentioned some of these, but when you are starting a new submission project and you're getting an incomplete or a work in progress submission from a company, or maybe it's something that they think they finished and you're going to review it for the first time, based on your experience, where do you start looking right away? Because that's where you find the most problems typically.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's pretty consistent. Device description, there's substantial equivalence argument and the predicate to, and then performance testing. When I read the device description and I'm like scratching my head when I'm like, I still don't understand what this device does. They've got multiple submissions they have to look at. And there's a question, and it could be low hanging fruit, just be simple as, hey, just get a little more explanation about this little bell or this little whistle here, and make sure that it's clear, because, you have to look at it from the client side too. They're down in the weeds. They just assume everybody understands this. Well, they don't. Their explanation wasn't clear or didn't connect the dots. So make sure that you have a really, really good device description section. It's very clear and understandable. I know sometimes that there's, you have to have a lot of technical information in there, but don't speak to it like, an engineer giving a master's class. When I'm in conversation, like, what do you do? And, I had to explain to them, I'm in regulatory affairs for medical devices, and I get that weird look, and I'm like, well, basically what I do, I'm the middleman. I take the engineering speak and then I translate it to FDA speak, because we can ask those questions like, hey, wait a minute, I don't understand this from an engineering standpoint. Explain it to me, where people can understand it.
Imagine you were talking to a firm, they want to submit a 510K right now. They might have started working on their package. They could be at any level here, but in the next couple of weeks or months, they do want to make a submission. What would you tell a firm like that has questions about review timelines and it's just a little bit nervous, isn't sure if they should do it? What would your advice to that firm be?
Thank God for MDUFA, those timelines, but the FDA so far, and I haven't heard anything, from colleagues or anything, but they're still meeting their goals. So they have to meet those goals. I'd tell them, don't worry about it. As long as you have a really solid substantial equivalence argument, your testing is all buttoned up, I think you go ahead and submit. I wouldn't worry about it. Maybe, small business application or 513G or something that doesn't have a MDUFA deadline, that you may be impacted there, but no, I think you should submit.
Is there anything that would make both sides' lives easier in terms of the preparation for actually working with a consultant on a 510K, in terms of just the nuts and bolts of document transfer, resource availability at the client team, who to make available? What are some things that, if they don't go well, can make hiccups between yourself and a client, and would be good to put on the radar ahead of time just to make that process go smoothly?
Yeah, going back again to the device description, making sure that's clear, making sure that, and again, the earlier working with consultant, the earlier the better, because like I said earlier, your substantial equivalence argument, that's the foundation of your submission. And if you don't have a good predicate, or, there's some question on, hey, how does this difference impact safety and effectiveness? Or does it add a new question of risk? If that argument is not solid, then your whole submission is, there's a lot of holes in there. And then again, testing, it's all about performance testing. How does, if there's standards, and make sure that the test results are clear and the reports are clear, and the summation of all the reports, make sure it makes sense. And look at your acceptance criteria. So if you don't pass your acceptance criteria, you don't notice that, hey, this didn't meet the acceptance criteria, and you turn in a report that failed. So I think it's, again, the earlier the better, and just, definitely utilize a consultant if you have the ability to.
Is it possible to reach out too early? Do you ever find yourself having to go back and say, look, there's more you need to do before I can get started on this? Is there a Goldilocks zone there? Too early, too late?
I would think once you've got your design pretty much all well, I'd say right before design freeze, you're like, okay, this is what we're going to go with, to start your verification, validation testing. I think that that's probably the right time because you want to make sure that, okay, well, this is the design we're going with here. Well, let's look at the predicates. Let's look and see what's out there, and then there's going to be a lag because it's testing, right? And, testing can take, maybe a couple of days or up to a couple of months. Okay. Let's see if it does what we say it does, or we think it's going to do, so there's that downtime. But then again, once you get those reports, and then that's another time that you need to have a regulatory consultant there helping you. And it's like, yeah, we met our goals, and this can translate to equivalence, so there is that there's too early. And then again, after testing and right before you're submitting, you're like, hey, we told our executive leadership team and Wall Street that we're going to launch in, February, and it's January 31st, and we want the submission. It's like, oh, wait, no, sorry. So there's a time to be late too. So I think, kind of around design freeze, right before you do VMD testing, I think it's a good time.